scientists.
Yeah, the difference is
seen replaced.
there's been global warming. Of course, it's occurred many times in geologic time. And if we look at the last time that we had glaciation and deglaciation over the last 23, major glaciation was 23,000 years ago as it began to warm. And those were caused by natural causes. The difference today is that we are accelerating deglaciation. And the acceleration has been caused, from the science community at least, from human intervention that was not here prior to the Industrial Revolution. So prior to that, it was virtually only natural causes. Those natural causes still are occurring, but we are exacerbating the situation. We're complicating the situation by adding major greenhouse gases to the atmosphere and trapping warmth. So the natural causes are going, and normally would go on for several thousand years, and instead that time scale has been contracted because of our increased use primarily of fossil fuels, which are creating more and more greenhouse gases. So it's a question of the natural causes being added to by what we humans have been doing since the Industrial Revolution, and that has almost gone up exponentially since the 1800s. We use much more fossil fuel today, partly because instead of being 1 billion people, as we were in the late 1800s, we're now at 8 billion people and using more and more fossil fuels and contributing to the greenhouse gases which trap heat. So the natural causes are all continuing. We're simply adding to it at a rate that was not seen before, which then increases the global warming at a faster rate.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question with Linji.
Hello, Carol from Connecticut. I'm curious about what type of research is going on now in Antarctica. What do you hope to learn? I'm sure you can say you're going to be studying the climate change, but is there other things other than that you hope to learn?
There are several areas of research in Antarctica. It's not only ice. There's, I had a lecture, I was in Spanish, so for the non-speaking Spanish people here, for example, in the South Pole, they're using as an astronomy area. There's a place to look into the Big Bang and the first glows of the Big Bang and all those cosmic rays that's coming. And they use the Antarctic Plateau because it's very dry, and you got a Lego area for that kind of observations. So you have all different things. You got the biology around Antarctica, you got the ice, but you got things like that, and the history and human interactions. Like a lot of people study as well medical, how people can live for prolonged times in isolation. That's also an important study, and Antarctica is perfect for that because you have people wintering with just 8 more or 10 or 20 people for a full year. There's a neutrino capture lab that blows my mind all the time. I try to think about it. I can't explain it very well, but it's a facility in the South Pole that have all these neutrino detectors buried 2,000 meters below the surface. And they're just getting these particles that coming out of space, and they're trying to figure out where they're coming from and why. Because it's one of the smallest particles in the universe, and I find it fascinating. But yeah, there are all these different things that they're studying in Antarctica. You probably have other things to add up to that.
Yeah, there are many other studies taking place. Obviously, just studying the glaciers themselves, their mass balance, that is to say how much ice is there, how much is being melted or evaporated or sublimated. Those are going on routinely. We're looking at the entire biological communities, how they are changing as temperatures in the ocean change because of global warming, which affects where many of the species can no longer tolerate the temperature range that they're living in. And of course that affects the entire food chain from the phytoplankton through the zooplankton and all the way up the food chain. So if there are many studies going on in the oceans to see how that temperature shift is affecting all of life in the seas. The climatologists and meteorologists, atmospheric scientists are looking at the shifts in atmospheric circulation, which are affecting climate on the individual areas. So there are studies across many disciplines. The chemists are involved, the physicists are involved, geologists, biologists, it goes on and on. Many, many studies on many different areas. Perhaps you could add to that as, yeah, go ahead.
One of the ones that captures the public's imagination a lot is deep ice cores. So that they drill down deep into the ice and pull up the cores, and they can look at the bubbles that were trapped in the ice at that period and know what the atmosphere was like at that time. And at the moment they're working towards a 1,000,000-year ice core. And that's their ultimate aim. They found the spot they hope to be able to work down. It's going to take 2 years of drilling to get this deep down and pull up an ice core from 1,000,000 years ago and be able to assess what major changes there were in the atmosphere at that time.
And all of this work is going on through the auspices of different national Antarctic programs. The members of the Antarctic Treaty, that is the countries who have signed it, and there's 56 now around the world, representing about 77% of the world's population. Within that group, 29 nations have their own scientific research stations on Antarctica or in the islands nearby. And so through those different national channels, there's a variety of research, as we just heard some descriptions of, and there's a lot of collaboration too. The Americans working with the Indians and the British working with Chileans. There's all kinds of exchange of scientists across countries to utilize the facilities that each nation has built on the continent. So lots of science. In fact, until 1990, I think it's about 94, there were more scientists and support staff in Antarctica each year than there were tourists, but we have since outstripped it. But there's still about 4,000 or so science and support staff down each year.
All right, thank you. We've got a question right over here.
Hi, Mary from Connecticut also. Sort of a follow-up for any of you. If you've spent time in Antarctica, can you talk from a personal level what it's been like, what the facilities are like, and any interesting, scary, personal experiences you had while you were down there?
So I've spent time on all 3 Australian stations, which are on the map here. I've shown you about. They're all around this side, the far side from where we were. Coming to an Antarctic station, it feels like going to a mining camp in, say, Alaska. You have big shed buildings with big, like, freezer doors, big tractors and equipment like around. In the summertime, there'll be snow and ice around, but bare gravel and rock as well. In the winter, it'll just be ice. The old idea of having everything encompassed in one station isn't so often pursued anymore. These days they build the buildings apart from each other, and that's both safety in case there's a fire in one of the buildings, and also to encourage people to not get that cabin fever mentality of never ever wanting to step outside. So they still have to rug up and move between buildings if they need to. And when it's bad weather, they'll have lines, ropes tied up to move between them. Some of the stuff is now underground. They've built some laboratories deep into the rock. The feeling on board when you come into one of these stations is a very close-knit community where everybody takes in turns sharing. But there is a bit of a class divide, because you've got the scientists and you've got the support staff. And the scientists tend to be very highly educated and very niche what they're doing, and the support staff tend to be tradespeople. They're carpenters, electricians and plumbers and cooks and so on. And both think they're the most important on station. So the scientists believe if we weren't here, there'd be no station, because we're here for the science. But the tradies know if there were no tradies here, the scientists couldn't survive. And so they both think, they're both a little bit slightly different culture. But they collaborate really well through the months. And if there's a bit of hardship on, they'll all pitch in and give a hand. They'll all help the scientists help the trades help the scientists. So the team spirit is very strong. And when they select people to go to Antarctica, they're very tough on the psychological tests, particularly if you're going to stay over winter. Because if you know someone who is not going to mix with the others or is a bit of a clash of personality, you don't need that on an Antarctic station throughout the winter. Hairy stories, anybody want to add to what it's like on station?
Well, I will say too that I've been on a couple of different nation stations, and there's a different vibe to them, depending on which country we're talking about. The sense of collegiality, though, where everybody takes a turn doing the dishes, for example, that's all rostered through, is a really nice way of getting things cohesive. I'll tell a very brief story. It's not a scary story because I was only a spectator, but it starts with the premise that when you go to this most remote, unpopulated place in the world, it's unusual to have any privacy. So it's so remote, but you're never supposed to be outside alone for safety reasons. And when you are at a station and you find there are couples forming, they start to then look for privacy. But they also need to find a place that's securely private, like a door or a door that locks. And the third thing they need is warmth. It's got to be heated. And so what happened to us when I was working on a fish physiology project where we were fishing through the sea ice from a little hut about a kilometer out in front of the base. We were just out on the sea ice, and we would go out there after dinner to continue our research. It was a nice night. We'd just walk out instead of drive a motor vehicle out there. And so to these potentially amorous couples, they would look out from the station window and see, there's no vehicle at the fish hut. We can go out there because it's warm and it's secure and we'll hear anybody coming. So, okay, well, they march out there. When you're fishing through a hole in the ice, you put black plastic over the windows because you need to look through the water to see what you're catching. And if you had open, windows lighting, you'd have a reflection. So we've got the windows blacked out. We're fishing away. We hear the crunch, crunch, crunch of a couple of steps coming towards us. And you look out and, I didn't know those two had hooked up. And then they come into the hut, and they've just come from bright sunlight with their sunglasses on and everything, and they've come into this black cave-like fishing hut. And so they don't see us initially. And they're laughing and they're giggling because they're so clever to have thought of this thing. And parkas start coming off, and about this time their vision adjusts to the inside of the hut, and they see there's three men fishing, looking down at this hole, and the shock on their face and the expressions they make, it's almost always the same, because they get super friendly to us. Oh, it's great to see you. How's the fishing going? All this. And then you can kind of see in their minds, the little dial turns like, yeah, that's probably long enough to sound legitimate. Okay, let's get out of here. And they turn and have to go find another spot somewhere else.
All right,
It's worth adding that the ratio of males to females on station tends to vary between like 80% males, 20% females, or 90% males, 10% females. And so the women have an expression. They say, the odds are good, but the goods are odd.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We have a question with Linji, then I'll be with you.
Okay, it's kind of a follow-up to the last one. You keep telling us how lucky we are, but I know it's not always so lucky. So what are the most extreme circumstances? Big waves, cold weather. I think Peter mentioned almost eating a penguin for survival. So what are your worst or most harrowing experiences?
My almost eating a penguin experience was in the sub-Antarctic, so not quite as cold and as being in Antarctica. And again, condensing it very sharply, three of us were on a remote sub-Antarctic island and took a small boat to an offshore island within the group, leaving one member back on the main island. We got into trouble on the second island where storms kicked up, and took some of our gear off the beach as the waves crashed in, and so we ended up shipwrecked basically on this island. We didn't have a radio or any way of contacting anybody. Some of our gear had been washed out, and so we had, to drink water that flowed down the creek before it went through the penguin colony. We were wise enough that we had brought a few just-in-case things, like a rain fly for a tent, and we had some waterproof matches and some fish hooks. And so we told ourselves that we could always eat penguins. We knew we weren't going to starve to death. There's plenty of penguins, plenty of albatrosses around, smaller petrels, no birds there. But let's try fish first. And we had 4 hooks, lost the first 2 before we caught a fish. But we were able to catch a few fish. This is just with hand line off the rocks. Fortunately, pretty stupid fish, so we were able to catch them, and we ate those. We got rescued after 5 days by signaling a fishing boat that happened to be sailing in the vicinity. So we never actually had to eat a penguin. It would have been a survival situation had it happened, but I'm glad we didn't come to that. So that's a very short version of the, and the lesson learned from this, by the way, was just how ignorant we were, and didn't really plan ahead for what, we'd never seen gales come in from the north before in 3 months of living on the island, and yet it did this day, and we didn't expect that, and we got caught out. So I learned a lot about being cautious about things, even if you haven't experienced them before.
I think I'll talk about a little different thing. You crossed the Drake twice now, and you've had an absolutely smooth ride. You could have almost gone with a canoe across the Drake. All of us have been across the Drake in different occasions, with different weather conditions. So I think my worst crossing of the Drake was in a Russian icebreaker. Well, all icebreakers have round bottoms. They do not have stabilizers for obvious reasons. They'd get broken off if they were breaking ice. This ship, of course, has stabilizers. So even though we had relatively calm seas, the ship was very stable. I mean, we had almost no rolling. So we hit a storm with winds up to 120 kilometers or 60 miles an hour, seas of up to 15-meter seas, 35, 40-foot seas. And the ship rolled 60 degrees. That's a 120-degree arc every 12 to 15 seconds. You don't stay in your bunk in those conditions. You don't get up and try and walk to the toilet or to get food because you can't stand. The officers on the bridge, which the bridge is as wide as your ship normally, or a little more, an officer was thrown from one side of the bridge all the way to the other side of the bridge. So if you look on this ship, it's as wide as this auditorium, and you're standing on one side, and he lost his balance and was swung all the way over to the other side of the vessel. Broke his shoulder in the process. Ooh. Now this ship could not take a 60-degree roll. We can probably get a 30-degree roll before this ship could not right itself again. So if you had a 30-degree roll, it's all over, right? Mm-hmm. But the icebreakers can actually take a 70-degree roll, 140-degree arc, and right themselves because they are very, very, very heavy below the deck. They need that to break the ice, ride up and break the ice. So all of their center of gravity is below the surface of the sea, very far below the surface of the sea, which is not the case on passenger vessels.
No, but I do want to emphasize too that this ship wouldn't have to make a long roll because we have the stabilizer fins that mean we're not going to roll so far that it stops it in the very first place.
Yeah, right. And that's true of all the passenger vessels coming down here, small to large. They have stabilizers. It's only the icebreakers that don't have stabilizers.
Oh, okay.
But that was quite an adventure, I must say.
All right, thank you. So after this, we only have 2 more questions.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Derek Hutchinson. I'm from New York, United States. My question has to deal with the continent. As was mentioned, there's like 3-4 kilometers of ice from the glaciers above the continent. If the ice weren't there, if we just were to magically make it disappear, hasn't the continent itself been compressed some number of hundreds of feet due to the weight of the ice? Is there any upwelling that would occur?
Yeah, I'll take that first. The answer is yes. One of the best examples I can give you from North America, as that's where you're from, is the Hudson Bay area. When the continental glaciers covered North America, Europe, Asia, the ground, that is the rock on which the glacier sat, was depressed. And in the east coast of Greenland, the depression was close to 120 meters. And in the Hudson Bay, 120 meters, that's about 250 feet, 400 feet, 400 feet, something like that. And in the Hudson Bay area, which was the center of one of the main ice sheets in North America, was depressed, as I recall, close to 250 or 300 meters. And that has gradually come back up. My experience on the East Coast, it came up roughly at 3 meters per century originally, about 10 feet per century. And today it's still rising at about 2 millimeters or so, less than a half an inch per century. You may have some other...
No, just to kind of reinforce that, there's other places where there used to be ice, all over Europe, for example, and Norway is also uplifting at the moment at that rate, that sort of rates, and we can see it from satellites. We can see it from satellite, get the measurements, and have like a time series of the last years and how that is increasing in some areas. Yeah, and Iceland as well. You can see places where now should be underwater, and nowadays you got a waterfall, and that's because of the uplifting, because of that ice just receded and moved away from that area. Yeah.
Yeah, basically what happens is when the continent is depressed, remember these are floating on more quasi-plastic under zone. So it's depressed, it squeezes the material out to the sides, and then when the pressure is released, that gradually flows back in and lifts the land.
Yeah. I felt like a good example, if you press here and you let it go, your hand sort of bounce back. It's sort of the same thing. Compressor going down with the pressure, and then you let it go, it bumps up with the same sort of motion, but a bit slower.
All right, thank you. We do have a question with Linji.
Good morning. My name is Anita. I'm from Ottawa, Canada, and thank you for the lovely spring day out there. I wanted to ask about the elements. We heard in one of the lectures about the amount of elements needed for our electronic equipment. I do believe it was 23. In the coring down in Antarctica, have we come across elements that exist more there than anywhere else in the world? And or have we added to the periodic table at all from things found down there?
I can't answer your question. I don't know. What I can comment on is there's no commercial extraction of minerals permitted under the treaty in the Antarctic. But you may know.
If I could just add, yeah, certainly there's no extraction permitted, but also, of course, the rock underneath the ice of Antarctica is nothing unique. It used to be part of Gondwana, the supercontinent, so it's got similarities with Africa and Australia and South America, etc. So it's unlikely that there would be some little spot of mineral or an element that hasn't been found anywhere else. And although I'm not a chemist, and I know we have chemists here, I believe all the most recent discoveries have been artificially created elements, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Just a curiosity, Antarctica is probably the best place to find meteorites. So that could be a I don't know, new element, but things that you can find in Antarctica that are rocks that came from space. And that's because you got all these rocks falling up in the last thousands of years, and they fall in a place, and because of the ice moves, but also it buries because it's snow, the rocks start to go down into this big ice river, and at some point you're gonna hit a wall because you'll have a rock, a mountain or whatever, and the ice does like an upwelling. You know? If you have a hose and you spray something, it splashes. Imagine that, but very, very slow motion. Some of those layers will go up. You get sublimation, you get lost ice, and then in those areas you'll find a lot of rocks, and those are meteorites that were coming deep buried in the ice, and they go up near those areas. So that's an interesting curiosity, I guess.
And there is a lot of collection of those. So while there's no extraction of minerals in Antarctica, there's a lot of collections of meteors and meteorites to find out what minerals are in them.
Okay, thank you. This will be our last question.
Thank you, Mary from Naples, Florida. Thank you for making this a really interesting trip. My question is about the Southern Lights. I was just wondering when and where you can see them. Is it too warm now or what? Thank you.
They could be happening right now above us. And so they're going on, but you need a dark sky to see them, and of course you need no cloud cover. Probably where we are now, you wouldn't be able to see them anyway, but where we were in our furthest south, there's the potential, but we almost never see them in fact, in all my Antarctic cruise visits, I've never seen Southern Lights because it's been too much light, too much daylight, not enough dark sky with no cloud cover.
Yeah, you'll have to overwinter if you want to see them.
Yeah, the cabin won't be quite so nice as what you've got here.
I don't know exactly, but the phenomena does not occur universally in either the north or the south. There are spots, in other words, the magnetic field which helps produce these is focused, so there are areas in the southern hemisphere or northern hemisphere that you will never see the northern or southern lights.
So I've seen them down here quite spectacularly in March.
For example,
when it starts really get dark enough skies to see these big dragons of green moving all around the whole sky.
For example, as Norman said, because the southern magnetic pole is tilted to farther away and closer to the Pacific side, or where New Zealand and Australia is, you can actually see the southern lights from the southern part of New Zealand, but you can't see it from the south part from Patagonia. So it's easy to see it from New Zealand. It's farther away from Antarctica, so it's northern, that is Patagonia in the south of South America. It's a curiosity as well.
Yeah, the magnetic north and south poles are not constant. They are constantly on the move. So for example, in the north, it used to be over northern Canada, now it's on the magnetic north pole, not the one you see on, well, with the deviation, it's now halfway across the Arctic Ocean toward Russia. And on the opposite side, that's the same thing that's happening. It's not where it was first discovered by, help me out, Greg, who got was it James Clark Ross?
Ross, first.
Yeah. In other words, where he found it, it's no longer there. It's always on the move, right?
Before we wrap up, I just wanted to say a thank you to the gentlemen who've been making it possible for us to present lectures in this room. The tech guys from the stage here, the audiovisual specialists, Manny, Christopher, Adrian, and J. Mark. We literally couldn't have done this without you guys, so thank you so much for your help and patience.
Alright, so that was it for the Antarctic wrap-up. Did you enjoy it? Did you ask all the questions?
Yeah.
Don't worry, they're going to be in the Bliss Lounge, I think, at between 5 5 to 6 p.m. They're gonna be in the Bliss Lounge on their help desk. So if you still have any questions, please do go and see them. How about another big round of applause for Greg?